and to senior centers and things of that nature. But we also passed, with the legislature's help, more severe penalties on fraudsters that commit securities fraud against Vermonters that are over the age of 65 or are vulnerable Vermonters. Really, it's despicable when people prey on a generation that has given them so much, really, like in a direct personal way. That person that's the scammer has gotten so much out of your generation, as have we all in Vermont and the United States. So it's one of the worst crimes, in my opinion. We also established a victim restitution fund for people that were victim of financial fraud in terms of securities fraud, so investment fraud. And we had allowed individuals to get up to 25% of what they lost from this fund. And if you're an older Vermonter over the age of 65, you could get up to 50% back of what you lost. And that's because you don't have as, when you're looking for retirement, you don't have as many professional years to make up those losses. So those sort of initiatives were really important for us. We're one of the oldest states in the country. We want to make sure we're taking care of our all Vermonters, but particularly Vermonters that are in those age demographics. And that's why, in terms of Vermont Saves, which is the reason that I came here today, is one of the basically the first major legislative initiative that we had out of our treasurer's office, which aims to provide people a more secure retirement whenever they decide to take retirement or able to take retirement. So the challenge that we're trying to solve is that, about 88,000 to 104,000 Vermonters don't have access to a workplace retirement plan. So us in the state, we have the benefit of a pension, plus other things that can add on to the pension as well. Other private employers, offer a 401k. But not every employer has the capacity to offer that kind of a retirement program. So we wanted to try to offer a retirement vehicle through an employer that didn't cost the employer anything, zero cost to the employer, and zero cost long-term to the Vermont taxpayer. And the program that we implemented, Vermont Saves, will do both of those things. It's been implemented now in 12 other states. 6 states have it operationalized. 6 other states are in the process of operationalizing it. So we're not the first state to do it. We can learn from their mistakes and their successes. There are vendors that they've hired that are now expert in standing this kind of program up and operationalizing it. We can benefit from their expertise as well. But it basically would require a business that doesn't offer a retirement plan to sign up for Vermont Saves. And it's a very easy process for the business to do so. The other states that we've been working with said they didn't have a business that took more than 15 minutes for them to sign up. And then once they're signed up, it's sort of a 2 or 3 minute process per payroll period to make sure that the payroll is going out as the employee has desired it to. So if you are an employee working at one of these businesses that signs up for Vermont Saves, as a default, you'll have a Roth IRA set up for you. You'll have a 5% payroll deduction pulled out of your paycheck that will go into your Roth IRA. And then you'll have a target date fund that those dollars will be invested in automatically. So if you do nothing, you're opted into the program. A Roth IRA is established for you. It is 5% payroll deduction and then put into a target date fund that most closely aligns with your prospective retirement. If you're more active, you can go in and opt out of the program altogether. You can go in and say, I want it to be 10%, not 5%. I want it to be 2%, not 5%. You could say, I want it to be in a more aggressive target date fund. I want it to be in a more secure target date fund. So the individual employee has all the flexibility around that, but there is a default that gets folks saving for retirement. And in the other states that have implemented the Vermont Saves program, they've seen somewhere between 70 and 75% of employees remain in the program when it gets established. And then on a year over year basis, like 95% of them are staying in the program year over year. And on average, they're saving about $2,000 a year toward their retirement. So if we saw those kind of numbers in Vermont based on our population, 10 years into the program being established, we would have something like $1.7 billion in additional retirement savings for people that are participating in the program. And that's great for them as individuals, gives them a more secure retirement. Even if they only are able to save a little bit, it might allow them to delay taking Social Security from 62 to 63. And as everyone knows, like every year that you delay that decision, 7 to 8% more in your Social Security check for the rest of your life. So that would be a significant benefit if it even did just that little bit for people. But it's a real benefit to those individuals that have more discretionary income, more security in retirement. It's a real benefit to the state. We won't have as many people in the long run as dependent on state benefits or federal benefits as they approach retirement or in retirement. They have more dignity in retirement, more independence in retirement. So it's really a win all the way around from our perspective. The employer who can't afford to offer this program gets to offer this benefit free of charge. We talked about the individual employees' benefits, the state of Vermont benefits, and also the economic benefits long-term of individuals having more discretionary income to spend in their retirement years. So we're really excited about it. We're describing it as a program that has a big impact without a big price tag. It's also not a program where 1 year from now or 2 years from now, we'll be able to say, look at all those concrete, amazing differences that the program has made, but very few programs can do that, but in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we'll be able to say, look at that impact this program had. It's the kind of long-term planning and long-term thinking that, I think the state of Vermont appreciates and likes to participate in, and we can do more of. So I'm excited that this program, tries to tackle this really significant challenge in a cost-effective way over the long run as well. So Dan, I don't know if you have any questions for me. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have about the program or Emily might have about the program.
No, I'll just say, so I know you've probably heard this before, but for folks Representative Krasnow, South Burlington, for folks who are here in the building working on policy, this is kind of like a dream policy, right? It doesn't, the benefit is so great and as someone who's approaching 40, and thinking
you and me both.
Right, we're in the same bracket, kind of thinking about that for me, and the folks at my bank are like, have you thought about your retirement yet? And I'm like, oh no. And so I'm just really grateful for your work on this. So thank you so much. And I know it's really going to benefit our generation forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many of that population, that 88,000 to 100,000 that don't have access to workplace retirement plan now. They tend to be younger. They tend to be less educated. They tend to be lower wage earners. They tend to be members of the BIPOC community. They tend to be female over male. So it's really a population that we want to lift up and help give them the tools to lift themselves up and their families up and try to build generational wealth and have economic impacts well beyond just an individual person's retirement. So providing access to retirement, providing tools for people to be able to save beyond just Social Security, is really, really critical and important.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would this affect the self-employed?
Yeah, so the way that the program is set up now, it would require those businesses that don't offer a plan that have employees of 5 or more. So 5 or more would be required to sign up. If you're under 5, you can sign up. It's voluntary. So if you're self-employed, you could sign up. You may get the benefit of having a lower cost if you sign up through Vermont Saves relative to just going out and getting an IRA or a Roth IRA at your local bank potentially. So that could be the benefit. No other state has gone down to 1 employee yet, those 12 states that have implemented it. But there is one state, Oregon, that's in the process of bringing that number all the way down to 1 in terms of required participation. We just would like to see how that goes before we follow their suit, because one of the things that we like about this is that other states have tried every element that we're moving forward with.
Find out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, exactly right.
Another question that leads me to is, what about people who are on disability and their savings is limited to keep their disability benefit?
Yeah, so another program that the Treasurer's Office operates, it's called ABLE, Achieving a Better Life Experience. And it's a federal program that allowed states to take advantage of this program, which Vermont did. So under an ABLE account, if you qualify based on a disability, you can save up to $100,000 in your ABLE account. It's basically like a 529 plan that you would have for college. It's called the 529A plan. And you could save up to $100,000 without having your benefits impacted. So that's it's already in existence. There are about 800, 900 Vermonters that have an ABLE account. There's about $7 or $8 million in those accounts generally. Average is about 8,800 or so, 9,000. So it's well above that $2,000 limit that you might have otherwise. So the ABLE account is a good, just another program that tries to tackle this issue of making sure people have some extra money to spend, because it can be really limiting to try to have people keep that little bit, $2,000 or less, in the bank to try to.
I personally know someone in that predicament.
Yeah, well, please tell them about, ABLE as a possibility. They can contribute if they work. They can contribute if they don't work. A family member can contribute for them. So it's very flexible in terms of who can start up the account.
And then what can you use the money for?
Basically, a lot of eligible disability-related expenses. So could be housing, could be transportation, could be education, could be some element of transportation beyond, like mobility, I should say. So it's pretty broad in terms of the eligible expenses.
I see we have a question online from Representative Anthony. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Danny, and welcome, Mr. Treasurer. I've been a booster of this for many, many years. I'm so glad to hear that you're trying to move it down to the self-employed, although on a voluntary basis. I understand the theory behind that. I wanted to point out to everybody who had ever had participated at their local bank or credit union or a employer-based plan that the employer makes no contribution. What I have discovered, and I've been in each of those, is the rate of return is severely impacted by the very likely private sector fee-based. Even if you're in a no risk, a purely liquid treasury bill account, the fees essentially eat up the first 2 to 3 to 4% of your returns. The treasurer is essentially doing this on the faith and credit of the state of Vermont and avoiding the fees. And so in a low interest rate environment in which we're in, you can't afford to pay fees, and you can't afford not to participate if you're able through the treasurer's program. And thank you again, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Anthony. And just to echo his point, the fees are much lower. I mean, there are fees to pay for the program. It's self-sustaining, doesn't require the businesses to pay, doesn't require the taxpayers to pay, but very low basis in terms of the fees that other states have charged to get the program on a sustainable financial footing. So I think to the representative's point, very well taken. The other exciting thing that's happening that the federal government enabled through its Secure 2.0, which I'm sure folks are familiar with, that a whole host of retirement provisions in it. They're revamping the federal savers credit, which will allow, starting in 2027, individuals who are saving for retirement in a qualified retirement plan, which these Vermont accounts would be, these Vermont Save accounts would be a qualified retirement plan. If you're saving and you're below $70,000, so you're sort of in the lower wage earner sort of cohort, you can get up to a $2,000 match from the federal government into your qualified retirement account every year that you are saving toward your own retirement. So you can imagine somebody that's making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, putting $2,000 away, and they might be eligible for this full $2,000 from the federal government that will come in to their Roth IRA on an annual basis. So that is significant to be able to have that kind of contribution from the federal government. So another reason we want to pass Vermont Saves now is to get as many Vermonters in a position to take advantage of that federal money as we can. And the timeline that we have for implementation will allow us to do that if we pass it this year. So we've been a big advocate of getting it done this legislative session.
And so where is it in the legislative process?
So it passed the Senate. We were very excited on the Senate side. We got support from both Democrats and Republicans. It was a committee bill, so there weren't sponsors. But if there were sponsors, we would have had bipartisan sponsors. And then it ended up getting voted out of the Senate unanimously. So unanimous agreement from all senators, which was excellent. The Senate has put the startup appropriation that we've asked for of $750,000 into the budget. So there's money available, which is a big step in something like this to make sure you actually have money available. So that step has been crossed. And then we provided testimony yesterday in House Government Operations. We provided testimony today in House Commerce. We believe that the House committee will vote it out hopefully this week. We're excited that the Ways and Means Committee and the Appropriations Committee on the House seem equally excited to work on this bill and hopefully get it done this session. So, we're still doing everything we can to get it done this year. Time is our biggest enemy at the moment, but we'll continue to push to get it done because every year that we delay, not only do we maybe miss this, federal savers credit, but it just is another year that we haven't made progress on this issue. So we'd like to get it done.
Yeah, and I agree. Time is here and it happens fast.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden we vote the budget out and then we adjourn. And wherever bills are in the process, that's where they stay. Whether they're hanging on the wall or in committee, that's the end of them until we start up again in January. So, yeah, hopefully we see some movement on it. Be looking forward to seeing that come on the floor.
Yes, we're optimistic.
Yeah. Any other questions for the treasurer?
Gordon Hansley.
There you go.
I was a Pat employer with independent contractors, commission-based, like a real estate brokerage firm.
Yeah, it's a great question, Gordon. So the treasurer's office has discretion to build rules around seasonal workers, part-time workers, sort of all of those employee relationships that might not be full-time permanent, but it draws the line at contractors. So a contractor, through that contracting entity wouldn't necessarily be able to participate in Vermont Saves. Them as their own independent business, even if it's a small business, could voluntarily participate or might be required to participate depending on its size. But that's sort of the demarcation that we've made.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want, what would be the downside if it's required? What would be the downside to not participating? I can't quite see what that would be.
Yeah. So, there's some folks that, like if you're the individual employee.
Yeah.
So, there's some folks that just, they can't, they're just living paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth. And, even a few percentage points, might be challenging for them at the moment. So we want to recognize that and understand that not everyone can, we'd like everyone to do it, but not everyone just is in a position at the current moment to save for retirement. The other thing that's good about the program, it being a Roth IRA, is if you are defaulted, like you ignored the paperwork, and all of a sudden you're getting 5% of your paycheck getting taken out and you're saying, wait a minute, I need that money. The Roth IRA, because it's post-tax, will let you take it at any time without penalty or tax, as long as you're taking the principal that you put in and not the returns that you've gotten on the investment. So there's a sort of another opportunity for folks to determine, whether or not they can financially afford to participate, or if they run into a financial emergency, their car breaks down, some other event happens that they need money quickly, sort of serves as an emergency savings account for individuals as well. Obviously, you like folks to keep it in retirement and let it build over time, but the realities of life sometimes, dictate that can't happen always. So I like the program for that reason too, that flexibility around your contributions into the Roth IRA.
So I just did someone over here? Go ahead.
One question, for the saving credit.
Yeah.
Is there a minimum savings level and a designated place that you need to save, or just any?
Yeah, so there's still more details the federal government has to release. Basically, I think the one detail we know is that it will phase out at a certain income level. So, I think somewhere in the low 70,000s, it sort of phases out completely. So the other thing we know is that it has to be in a qualified retirement plan. So if you're just saving it in your bank account or in a brokerage account, it wouldn't qualify. It has to be in a Roth IRA or a 401k or some kind of, qualified plan. So those are, and we know that the maximum you can get will be $2,000 a year. Some of the other details about how much you have to save at what income level, we just don't know the details of that yet.
And does that have to be earned income?
No, I think it's just anything you're putting into the qualified retirement account.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. If you're a contractor, for instance, and you get a job that gives you some extra money, can you just make put some money into that account without having it be a weekly?
Yeah, like a one-time payment.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think in the rulemaking, that's certainly something we can provide flexibility for. The beauty of the thing is that the beauty of the program is that you you get this inertia of starting to save and a little bit comes out of your paycheck every period and you almost forget it. That's sort of the benefit. But if people are willing to look at that money and say, instead of doing all these fun things, I'm going to put it in my Roth IRA, then more power to them. So, yeah, I mean, the only limitation is that their annual contribution amounts, right, on a Roth IRA or any other retirement type account.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for the treasurer while he's here? Will you take questions off?
Yeah, for sure.
Topics?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
have at it.
It's not always you get this opportunity. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything or any comments they want to make or any questions. Yeah.
Hi, Brian Stonicle. Question, do you think Vermont's ever going to move any further into reducing the amount of Social Security tax? I know they've incrementally moved a little bit, but we talk about all these other things, and I find it very interesting that we provide people with property tax relief all the way up to $130 some odd thousand. But anybody, and I have a mother who's 80 years old who still works full time, not necessarily because she wants to, but because she has to.
Wow.
And she's luckily just below the new, I think it's 60,000 or something. But why on earth Vermont is one of the very few states in the country left that taxes anybody, no matter what your income is, on your Social Security?
Yeah, that was a great question, Brian. I mean, so when I got elected and it was sometime in December, I had my first meeting with the governor outside of having worked with him before. And on the list of things I said I'd love to collaborate with him on were 2 tax items, military pensions and Social Security. And, those are just 2 tax. And I should say that I think it's worth probably the state of Vermont, and we've done this in the past, but looking comprehensively at our tax policy and what kind of behavior we're motivating and driving from our tax policy. Because there are a lot of Vermonters, or new Vermonters, I should say, a lot of people that are moving to Vermont. But like they say, when you fly, you have a choice in travel, and you have a choice in terms of climate refugees or political refugees, or, just people from COVID that are rethinking their life and where they want to live, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, other New England states. So I think broadly, we want to think about how are we, incentivizing or disincentivizing people to move here and to stay here. But 2, to pull out of that comprehensive review, 2, that to me make a lot of sense to eliminate completely are those 2, Social Security and military. Whether or not it will happen or not, to be seen.
And Representative Harrison and I have a bill in Ways and Means that increases the exemption on the Social Security, the part that's taxed, and then it also ties it to inflation so that each year, instead of us having to go through the legislative process, it looks at what was the inflation, should we be raising it up, and puts in some sort of a methodology that can change that based on how the economy's doing. So we presented it to Ways and Means, and I haven't seen much more, but we try. We'll keep trying on it. So it's out there. Some different ideas and possibilities. I don't think you're going to see it just go to 100% exemption, but if we can move it smaller increments, we'll get to the end eventually. So,
thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for your question. Well, I'll just mention one other program that we're running if we have time.
Yeah, please.
So, the state of Vermont, in terms of our financial position, at the moment is quite good. Our credit ratings are strong. We'd like them to get back up to AAA. We're working on that, but we did have kind of an upgrade in terms of an outlook. S&P 500 moved us from negative to stable, which was, a good move toward the AAA status. But the thing that they always point out in Vermont were unfunded pension liabilities and demographics. So we're getting older, our workforce is getting smaller. And the legislature did a lot of good work on the pension issue last year to try to, reduce that unfunded liability. And estimates are anywhere between 1.5 billion to 1.9 billion that was reduced. And the legislature is continuing to commit to fully funding it to get it fully funded. So state employees and teachers and municipal employees that are retiring or retired, have confidence that that is going to be there for when you do retire and through your retirement. But the demographic thing is something else that we need to try to tackle. And prior to COVID, I had some concerns about the future of Vermont. I just thought that we weren't seeing the kind of in-migration that you'd want to see. We weren't seeing the kind of birth rates that you'd want to see to ensure that, as the credit rating agencies point out, those demographics were going to change at some point, that we were going to flip and start getting more workers or flip and start getting younger. But COVID has really seemed to flip the script on that completely. The demand to move to Vermont remains high, even years, after the pandemic has started, and a long period of time from when the health emergency will end in a couple of weeks. But there's still this demand. And there'll continue to be this demand, I believe, from climate refugees that are moving from out west, moving from places that don't have water or sufficient water, places that are seeing significant, tornadoes or other severe weather. It's just not the kind of safe, habitable, place that these locations have been in the past. And Vermont and northern New England are really one of the few places that will see the least amount of impact from climate change. Not that we won't have our own impact, but meteorologists and scientists are showing northern New England as having a pretty good, a pretty low impact relative to these other places. So I think that's going to continue over the next number of decades, even, to drive people to Vermont. The other thing I was surprised to see when I went around campaigning, and I visited every town in Vermont, all 252 towns. So that was fun. We had a lot of conversations. But there are a lot of people that moved to Vermont who were political refugees, I would call them. They were from Texas or Arizona and Florida. They either just their own personal ideology didn't mesh with what was happening in their state, or they had a transgender child, or they had a child that was gay, or whatever the scenario was. And they just said, I couldn't raise my child in Texas anymore. Now, for the country, I don't think that's a great thing, because I think we are in this period where we're separating from each other and not able to talk about politics. And I think that's only growing resentment and anger and lacking the ability to communicate. So I'm worried about that, what it means for the country. But for Vermont, there are a number of people that are moving. That was the surprise to me, with the number of people I met that had moved to Vermont for those reasons. But for either reason, COVID, climate, political, people are coming. We see it in our housing market. It's just, I'm sure you struggle, or your family struggle, with finding housing that's affordable. To me, it's pretty direct. It's a direct result of this inflow of migration that we saw. We've been talking about needing to change our demographics for a long time. And then when the moment happened, we realized that we don't have enough housing to actually keep up with the demand. And one of the things in the Treasurer's office we're trying to do to help facilitate that is we announced the expansion of this program called 10% in Vermont. So it allows us to invest up to 10% of the state's cash on hand into the Vermont economy for economic development. And the state's 10%, if you will, has grown considerably over the last 3 or 4 years. We used to have $300 or $400 million cash on hand. Now, I think today's number was $1.2 billion. So we're consistently over $2 billion, and that 10% number has gone considerably higher. So we're being conservative with it. Some of that money is federal money that will be spent down over the next 2 or 3, 4 years. Some of it, we're in a period of really high revenues right now. Some of it will potentially dissipate. But we're confident that we can invest another $85 million from that money into the Vermont economy and have all the liquidity that we need to pay our bills and make sure programs are funded. And the priorities that we have for that $85 million, number one is housing, development of new housing, climate mitigation, climate action, and then social equity goals. And housing stands out to me as number one in terms of our policy initiatives and choices. And it's housing of all sorts: affordable housing, senior housing, first-time home buyer housing, workforce housing, whatever you want to qualify them as. But we need more housing across the entire spectrum. I know my parents still live in the house that I grew up in. There was 5 of us. Now it's the 2 of them. If they had somewhere to downsize, maybe they very well would, but there's just not really a lot of options in Brattleboro. And if they were looking to downsize, they're probably competing against the 25-year-olds that want the same kind of place, like downtown, urban condo or apartment, easy living in terms of that sort of thing. So if they could downsize, it would allow that house to then have another young family to move in, and it would sort of continue this, this sort of spectrum of housing growth that we need to see. So that's a program that we're really excited about. We just announced it a couple of weeks ago, the expansion of it. We're going to start taking applications on June 1st and looking forward to the kind of projects that will come across our desk that we'll be able to hopefully fund and have an impact on building more housing, which I think is the single greatest thing we can do to improve our economy.
You have a question from Senator Renner?
Oh, yeah.
Hi there.
Hi.
This is going to seem trivial compared to everything else we're talking about, but you do have that annual campaign where you ask people to check and see how much money the state is holding of theirs in some account.
Yes.
What is the increase per year that you see on that end, or do you ever see a decrease? Are people really paying attention and taking their money out? Because it seems to me that may be something we could tap and take a loan out of ourselves if we need to finance something. Because it seems to just keep growing from my view as a voter before I was even in the legislature.
So the senator is talking about the unclaimed property program that the treasurer's office operates. And I just was coming from a meeting with our vendor on unclaimed property. And I asked the same question, like every year it's going up. Do any other states, is that the same? And they said every state is the same. So, so unclaimed property, basically, if you have a deposit that you made on a cell phone or in an apartment, you have a bank account that you just lost touch with, maybe a relative does. Eventually, those institutions have to turn that unclaimed property over to our office, and then it's our responsibility to try to reunite people with their money. So right now, there's $120 million of unclaimed property that we are managing, trying to get back to Vermonters. The simplest way to search, if you yourselves have unclaimed property, is missingmoney.com. Missingmoney.com is a website that all of the state treasurers across the country participate in. So you don't just search for Vermont, you search for every state where you might have unclaimed property. And then if you do have unclaimed property and you click in, you'll go to that specific treasurer's website and there's information about how to return it. So we do though, Senator, like there isn't, we have about 1 million individual pieces of property that we're holding, only 640,000 Vermonters. We have over 1 million individual pieces of property. Some of those are 5 cents, $10, they're very small. So the likelihood that hundreds of thousands of people are just going to wake up one day and claim all that money just statistically is not likely. So even though we have $120 million of claims, maybe there's 60 or 65 million that we're actually holding, because every year we do make a contribution to the general fund with an expectation of what will never be claimed in the future. So people always have the right to claim their money. That never goes away. It's just statistically you can make a determination that a certain percentage of it is unlikely to ever be claimed. And we feel confident enough to turn over $2 or $3 or $4 million to the legislature on an annual basis.
Yeah, my neighbor's name was there, and I told him, I'm like, hey, your name's on this list. He calls me back the next day or sent me a text. He's like, it was like 50 cents or something.
Well, I don't have the document with me, but I do want to thank the legislature because we, every year there's an unclaimed property day, which is on February 1st. And we did media outreach and there were articles about it. But one thing we did this year was ask individual legislators, all 180, to send out information to your mailing list, to your front porch forums, however you disseminate information. And our vendor just gave us the results that it was February 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th were the 4 highest search dates in the history of unclaimed property. So, and the only thing we really did differently was ask legislators to participate in that process with us and spread the word. So thank you very much.
So how much do people claim? I'm curious.
So to date, there's like 1.5 million.
For those 4 days?
For the entire year to date.
Okay.
For those 4 days, sometimes those numbers fluctuate just by the fact you have a few 100,000 but there were hundreds of thousands, if I remember correctly. That's great.
The idea is to empty it, right?
Yeah. Ideally, we'd like to empty it, not to the general fund, but to the people that whose money it is. Yeah. One great story we just heard, people always ask, the great stories about unclaimed property, and Ashlyn Doyon, who's here from the treasurer's office, helped facilitate this, but an individual had over $20,000 and the individual was experiencing homelessness, and the bank president flagged it and knew who the person was. And Ashland and our director, Al LaPearl, and the president were able to coordinate having that person come to the bank and claim their unclaimed property. So something that really could be life-changing for that person, and only because of the work of, folks on our staff and a bank president that was paying attention, did that happen. So certainly encourage you to check for yourselves and your family.
Missingmoney.com.
Yeah, missingmoney.com.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
thank
you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sam.
All right. So, have a great day. If there's no other announcements or anything anyone wants to bring up. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody on Zoom.